If you suddenly need residential care but you haven't got, say, for example, $400,000, who pays? I mean, I'm talking about a big lump sum. What happens then?
Well, the first thing is if you don't have the money and you don't have the assets, then often you won't be expected to pay the upfront lump sum.
Right.
So it's one of those things where it's more like a user affords. If you can afford to pay it, you'll be expected to pay it. If you don't have the assets to warrant that, then you aren't going to actually have to pay that upfront lump sum. And the thing about when you're going into an aged care facility, if it's a government-registered aged care facility, what you pay you won't be able to tell the difference between one resident and the other resident about what they paid to get into that facility. So you'll have two people sitting in beds in the same room and you won't know from the service that they receive and the care that they're given whether one paid an upfront lump sum or the other didn't, whether one's paying a higher higher means-tested fee plus the basic daily fee or they're not. The services provided are the same wherever you go. Okay. So it's you're not getting more or less for the service that you provided, but if you do have the resources, then you're expected to pay and contribute to help cover those costs of aged care. So, Patricia, if you really didn't have anything at all and you were going into a nursing home, then realistically, your fortnightly pension is actually designed to cover most of your costs and you'll have a little bit extra for your luxuries. The more that you own, the more that you're going to be expected to contribute to keep covering those costs of care.
Of course.
Okay. I just want to clarify at this point. So that's the refundable accommodation deposit. But there's another fee, isn't there? You mentioned it then just briefly, the daily care fee. So your accommodation is one thing, then the next component is your daily, and that also is means tested, and there's a cap on that after a certain period of time. How does that work, that part of the equation work, Justin?
Yeah, so everybody that goes into a nursing home or an aged care facility is going to be required to pay a basic daily fee. So that's a fixed fee set by the government and it's based around the age pension rate and it gets indexed when the age pension is indexed. But on top of that, there is potentially something called a means-tested fee. Now, again, the means-tested fee, it's in the title. It is income and assets tested. So the more that you own, again, the larger that means-tested fee is going to be. But as you rightly said, Lex, that means-tested fee is capped. There's an annual cap and there's a lifetime cap. And once you have actually reached, if you do reach those annual or lifetime caps, you actually will never have to pay a means-tested fee again for as long as you're in an aged care facility. But it's entirely possible that if you actually don't pay enough towards that means-tested fee, you might not reach those caps and you just continue to pay that additional daily fee on top of your normal expenses.
Okay.
There is one other thing that you should mention, though, is that there are other types of facilities. They're called extra service facilities. The first thing is that they can charge higher refundable accommodation deposits, and they can also charge an additional fee called an extra service fee that's paid on top of your basic daily fee and your means-tested fee. Now, with these facilities, you are paying for it. You know what you're getting yourself into. This is not regulated by the government. That extra service fee is basically they charge what they want to charge, and you're acknowledging that that's what you're going to pay when you go in. So when you go into one of these places, you know you're going to be paying more than the standard person is going to be paying, and that's what you accept as being able to get into this particular place. And it's important to say that you're not, again, it's not that you're getting extra care. It's not that the nursing support that you're getting is going to be any different, but what you're paying for might be nicer rooms, bigger flat screen TVs. It could be a conference room for the family to all gather in and celebrate birthdays in, or whatever it might be. But the care itself in an extra service facility is the same as the care that you're going to get in your standard nursing home.
This question comes up quite a lot with people. What happens, for example, you want to leave your house to your children in your will? Does it mean that you don't have to use it as payment for aged care?
So there's nothing that says your home has to be sold to fund aged care. It's not a legal obligation in any way that says your home has to be sold. And in fact, if you're a member of a couple and one of the member of a couple has to go into the aged care facility, whereas the other one's still staying at home, then the home remains exempt for aged care. It's not counted. It won't go towards any of the fees because my partner is still living in it. It remains an exempt asset while they're there. But if you are a single person or you're the last of the member of a couple to go into an aged care, then yes, the family home is going to count as an asset towards your aged care fees. Having it left to the kids in the will is not going to make any difference to that. But what it actually does, it makes an issue for your will rather than an issue for aged care.
Right.
So if in your will that you specify that your house, and we'll say it's 5 Smith Street. So say in your will you've written, I leave my house 5 Smith Street to my children when I pass away, but then I sold 5 Smith Street to fund my aged care facility. I've still got a lot of cash, but I don't have the actual physical property that I named in my will. I run the risk of actually making my will invalid because I don't actually have the asset to leave to anybody. And then if I made my will invalid, it may potentially become intestate, and then you've got the whole issue of how is that going to be managed, and none of the will is actually going to hold if it becomes invalid under those circumstances. So what I would actually suggest is you should probably have a chat with your solicitor. If you have actually named something like your physical property, rather than generic statements or my goods or chattels or any property, but named an actual address, then you might want to have a chat with your solicitor about rewording your will to protect the estate should you actually have to go into an aged care facility and sell your home to make that happen.
So, Justin, are you saying that it would be safer not to say the address but to say my goods and chattels, including property? Would that be a safer way?
I will clarify and say I've got enough hats on. I'm not a solicitor, but what I do know is there is a risk if you specify particular assets in your will and you don't have those assets, then the conditions of the will can't be met. Okay. Now, that could be the property, that could be jewellery that you've then sold or whatever it might be. But if you specify particular assets by description and they're not there anymore, then it might be that the conditions of the will can't be met, then it becomes a problem. So having a chat, if you've done that sort of thing, you might just want to go back and have a chat with your solicitor and make sure, am I covered if my circumstances change? More importantly, what happens if my circumstances change and I'm no longer mentally capable of rewriting my will?
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
So if I have to go into an aged care facility because I'm physically unwell but I'm mentally with it, that's fine. I can still rewrite my will. But if I have to go into an aged care facility because I've got dementia or I'm no longer able to say that I understand what I'm doing, no solicitor will allow me to rewrite my will, and we're basically stuck with the document that we had before. So we don't want that to happen. So we want to make sure that you're covered under all those circumstances. Doing these things, these are the sorts of things you want to do now before you need to do them, because often when you need to do them, you can no longer do it. You're no longer in the situation where you actually can make those changes.
What happens if I sell my home, I give the proceeds to the family, I move in with them, and later on they can't look after me anymore and they decide to move me into aged care? All my money's gone. Who pays now? Yeah,
so this is actually a much more complicated question than you might think up front. So, because there's a couple of things that would occur. So what I will say right up front is that this is absolutely the sort of circumstance where you should give us a call. And in this case, it's actually the Financial Information Service through Services Australia. So call us on 132300. That number again is 132300, and ask to speak to a Financial Information Service officer when it asks for the reason for your call. And do this before you make any decisions, because this is the sort of thing that you can't fix once you've done it. So you need to make sure you understand before you've done it. So theoretically what we're doing here is we've handed over money to the kids. We'll assume that it's something that we call a granny flat arrangement, where the kids have given me the right to live with them theoretically for the rest of my life, but now I've had to go into an aged care facility. And so the way that it works is that it's the 5 years that we are worrying about. Under Services Australia's gifting rules, if you transfer assets to another person, the first $10,000 of those assets, it's fine. We'll accept that that's gone. But everything else, we're going to pretend sits in your bank account for the next 5 years. So not including a granny flat arrangement where it's a bit different, but if I just handed over money to the kids, then I'm still going to be assessed as having that money for the next 5 years. So give an example, sold my place for $500,000, handed over the $500,000 to the kids. Services Australia is going to put back $490,000 into a pretend bank account, and it's going to sit on my record for the next 5 years. It will affect my rate of pension that I'm getting, but it will also count as an asset when I'm going into aged care.
Okay.
So it's going to affect my aged care fees. 5 years and 1 day, it ceases to be assessable as an asset and no longer has an impact, it won't affect my aged care fees.